Advice and opinions expressed during the program are solely that of Jung's Garden Center, not WBEV or Good Karma Brands. Here is Thomas Reinfeldt with the Garden Doctor.
Well, thank you so much, LA, and thank you for joining us for another exciting edition of The Garden Doctor. This interview will be on the audio tab at dailydodge.com, of course, but the Bare Root Room is getting ready to be opened at Jung's in Randolph. You guys are getting excited about Holy Week coming up next week. Lots going on.
Yeah,
still got some dirty fingernails, which I love to see.
Yeah. I'm still working in the greenhouse a little bit, but also in the Bare Root area. So we're getting things ready to go, and in another week or so, the Bare Root Room will be open, and then you can come in and get it. I don't know that we'll be ready for planting yet. But if you have a cool garage or an outbuilding that doesn't freeze too hard, you can get the bare root and store it until the ground is ready to plant. I usually tell people when to come in is when farmers start working the ground to put in their oats and some of their early crops. That's about the time that it's time to put your bare root in, because you want to get it in early so that the roots have a chance to establish before the tops break to demand a lot of water from the root system. And so I would say probably the way things are going now, maybe the middle of May is, but middle of April is usually a good time to get the stuff in and get it in, because once it's in the ground, you don't have to worry about a frost with bare root, because the plants are dormant, and the frost is not going to hurt the top part of the plant. It's the root system that's more susceptible to injury from cold weather. So that's coming up. And I brought an Easter lily along, of course.
I see that. I love it.
Holy Week starts next week, and we're preparing for that, and we've got some Easter lilies in. We've got some mini daffodils and some of the spring flowering bulbs that have been forced, and they're kind of nice to have and enjoy before the actual ones outside start to come. And then I was in the greenhouse, and I thought some of the hanging baskets that we've got for early sales are starting to look pretty nice there. The plants are starting to come over the edge of the baskets, but the petunias are really very spectacular, and we'll have a lot of really nice hanging baskets for Mother's Day, so I thought I'd bring those along. Also time you can start thinking about getting your tomatoes and some of your other crops started. Usually about 6 weeks from the time you start tomato seeds until they're ready to plant out, and then the cool season crops like cabbage and cauliflower and kohlrabi and Brussels sprouts probably can start those in another week or two also. So lots of things going on. We've got a lot of new things over at the Garden Center, and people are welcome to come over.
If you got a question for Dick Zondag, the Garden Doctor from Jung's Garden Center, our lines are open, 885-4446. Also, our text line, 887-9595. And we did have a question, but before we get to that, going back to the bare roots, what sort of plants are in the Bare Root Room? What sort of offering do you have?
It's fruit trees, all the apples and pears and plums, and we do have a few of the peach trees that people are looking for, and they usually come in and they're gone. Peaches are one of the crops that we sell out of very early, and so if that's something that you're looking for, it's probably time to come in and get it. Then you also have the grapevines, the raspberries, and then any of the landscape plants that you use around the house, the potentillas, the spireas, the hydrangeas, those are in the Bare Root Room. And hedging materials, privets, and the cotoneaster and honeysuckles and things like that are also, we have available as bare root. And so if you're planting a hedge, planting bare root is very advantageous because it's a lot less expensive than buying all potted nursery.
And I take it when we are planting bare root and keeping it in our garage or shed that is above freezing, when we do plant them in the ground, we're going to want to use, again, a nice thick layer of mulch or something to keep that warmth and moisture in.
Right. And when you're keeping them in the garage, it's a good idea, they're wrapped in plastic-coated paper, a good idea to keep some moisture around them a couple times a week, pour a quart of water into the packing material, and then 24 hours before you plant them, time to soak them, and you soak them for anywhere from 15, 16, 20, up to 24 hours. And we usually recommend putting a root stimulator. Plant and Grow is a good product that we sell at the garden centers. And then when you are planting them, to enrich the soil, you should use at least half of the soil that you take out of the hole, but then add some compost or peat moss or some amendments to the soil, so when you put it around, the plant has a lot of nutrients to work with. And then we also have slow-release fertilizer tablets that you can put in the ground right next to the roots. Because they are slow-release, they won't burn the roots, and that will give the plant 3 to 5 years worth of fertility.
One issue that people may have planting bare roots or any sort of bulbs in the ground right now, and actually the first question we have today is about dogs, because,
Okay.
Dick, you might know dogs love dirt, and they love getting dirty and bringing that back in the house. Do you have any tips to how to prevent dogs from digging up fresh bulbs that we planted?
Well, you know, I was just thinking that myself. We just have a new member in our family that my daughter brought back from Thailand, and she tends to be a digger. I mean, she's dug up several spots in the lawn already. Not sure how you inhibit them. If you want to keep them from getting down to the bulbs, so you can put chicken wire over it, and once they hit that, they won't be able to get any deeper. But yeah, that is a problem. Squirrels are a problem with digging up bulbs, but most of those bulbs that were planted in the soil are pretty much established and will make it. It's just when you freshly plant them that you have to worry about them being dug up by the squirrels or other rodents. So, yeah, there are some repellents that you can put in the soil that will somewhat inhibit them from digging, but it's a problem.
We do have a caller that's been patiently waiting on the phone, so let's go there and say good morning, caller. What's your question for the garden doctor?
Hello. I have two questions. First question, we've got a cherry tree that doesn't bear fruit. I know it's only maybe 3 years old,
Okay.
but doesn't bear fruit. Do I need a cross-pollinator for that tree? I've got
No.
apple trees fairly close.
No, the cherry trees are completely self-fruitful. You shouldn't need other cherry trees, but
Okay.
is the tree growing well?
It seems to be quite healthy.
Okay. One of the things you can do, and I've talked about this on several of the programs, you have
Talked
to,
about whacking it.
yeah, you have to put the tree under a little bit of stress to make it go from its juvenile into its adult form. So you take a baseball bat or something like that and wrap the bark good and solid in a couple sides of the tree, or you can actually take a carpet knife and girdle the tree about halfway around, and that will also do it, where you make a sharp incision in the bark
Okay.
and cut right down to the wood. Do not remove any of the bark. If you miss if you don't get down to it, don't try to retrace your steps,
You
because
cut
if you
up
take
and-
any of the bark out, it's going to be very detrimental to the tree.
Okay. You cut around the tree, not up and down?
Around the tree, right.
Okay. My other question was, my apple trees, first few years they had beautiful apples, and they're starting to get, I'm not going to say wormy, but they get spots on them.
Right, that's apple
I-
scab.
Okay, is there a one-size-fits-all spray that I can spray them? Because we need to spray them several times.
Right. The first thing you want to do is make sure that you get all the leaves and all the dead fruit or any fruit that's in the tree
Yep.
out of the area, because that's
I've
where
been
the
doing that. I
yeah.
keep it quite clean around there.
yeah,
So
that's where the
not a
initial
big-
infection comes from. The spores are stored in those black spots, and they actually explode up into the tree when the tree is most susceptible
Okay.
One of the things that you can do is called a dormant spray, and it's a spray of emulsifiable oil, and sometimes you'll find oil and lime sulfur. But you spray that on the tree according to the label strengths before the leaves start to come out. But you have to have a day when you're not going to go below freezing. Now, it's not going to hurt the tree if it does, but it'll make the spray less effective. And so you spray the tree and the ground around the tree, and that's kind of a house cleaning. And then the three most important sprays for a fungicide is when the leaves first come out, when they get to a stage called silver tip, when the leaves are just expanding, they are very hairy, and that's one of the times that they're very susceptible to apple scab. Then when the blossoms first start to show color, that's the second time that you should be spraying, and the third time is at petal fall, when the petals are falling off the tree. And the best fungicide to use is Captan, and that's kind of a broad spectrum fungicide.
Do you carry that?
Yes, we do. Yep.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for calling.
Thank you so much for that question. 885-4446, the number if you want to call in your question for Dick Zondag. And you mentioned girdling the tree using a carpenter's knife and going halfway around the tree or all the way around the circumference of the tree?
Well, halfway will do it. You can go all the way around the tree. You can go, but you have to make sure that you don't remove any of the bark. You make a very sharp incision, and what it does is it disconnects the root system from the top of the tree. But because there's no distance, the cambium layer will reknit almost immediately, but it'll put the tree under some stress, and stress is what causes plants to go from their juvenile state into their adult state. And so, most of the time when trees aren't productive, they're growing like crazy, and that means that they're just enjoying being kids, and by putting them under stress, you can do that several different ways. You can, like I said, take a baseball bat and hit the bark, and that will disrupt some of the flow up and down the tree, and that will put the tree under stress. Girdle the tree, and then the other thing you can do is root pruning, where you take a shovel, a spade shovel, and drive it in the ground as deep as the shovel will go, right around the drip line of the tree, and that will cut some of the roots, and again, it's putting the plant under stress. And you only have to do that once, and then now it's not going to make it work this spring, because the blossoms for the crop in spring are set down in the fall of the year prior. So the apple blossoms are on the tree before they go into winter. But what it'll do is it will encourage them to put on the blossoms in the fall. So I can't do anything about this spring with the girdling or with the cutting of the roots. That will have no effect on it this year. If you do it and it blossoms like crazy, it wasn't because you did that. It's because they were already there.
So in the example of that cherry tree, it was 3 years old, no fruit. Aside that it's a juvenile, it needs to grow up a little bit, needs
Right.
to get whacked or get the carpeting knife. For cherry trees, would that be the zone then for 2 to 3 years old?
Yes, you don't want to force fruit trees to start fruiting by doing that immediately, because the plant has to have some time to set down the new roots that they're going to be doing to grow the tree and for the tree itself to grow. Some fruit trees, some apple trees actually will blossom and fruit the first year, but if they do, you should be removing the fruit when they're when they're very small, because you don't want the tree to be putting its energy into the fruit, which it actually does if it's got any kind of, the fruit has the seed inside of it, and any plant wants to produce its own seed. And so if you've got fruit on there, it's going to be putting its energy into that seed. And so if you've got any fruit on the tree, the first 2 years, you should take it off, especially peaches. Peaches tend to be blossoming right away the first year, and people will come in and say, oh, I had a beautiful peach on my tree last year. And I said, well, maybe it won't be alive this spring, because it's peaches are very close to their hardiness line, And if you fruit a peach too much and you deplete the reserves of the tree too much, tree doesn't have any reserves to get through the winter. So, the first 2 or 3 years should go into the tree itself, and then after that you let it go. And then if it doesn't fruit the first couple or year or so after that, after it's grown a little bit, then you can use that method of shocking it from its juvenile into its adult form.
Dick Zondag, the garden doctor from Jung's Garden Center, 885-4446. You can also drop a text on 887-9595. Now, the example was of fruit trees needing to grow up from juvenile to
Right.
adult. Is every plant like this?
There are some. Most of the fruiting plants, like raspberries and grapes and strawberries and things like that, will very seldom have that problem. It's mainly the tree fruits that have that problem, and or the nut trees. But nut trees like the Carpathian walnut, and we do have a hardy pecan now. Those trees take probably 8 to 10 years before they become fruitful. So again, you don't want to use that particular method to make them fruit prematurely, because they do have to have a few more years to grow. But it's mainly the tree fruits that are that way.
This is the garden doctor, Dick Zondag, joining us. And Dick, I realized something. I have to confess to you that I am a chronic overwaterer. I realize that when I'm in doubt, especially starting seeds, I think, oh, it looks like it's too dry, and I add more water. Then I realize why the seeds aren't starting, because I've drowned them all. And you mentioned that this is the right time to be starting tomatoes. How should we be preparing the seed beds? How often should we be watering for the first couple weeks?
With tomatoes and peppers and the cole crops, what I recommend for starting seeds is to get a soilless mix, a peat-based mix similar to what these plants are growing in. And you wet that mix thoroughly, and then you put it into either a clean flat, which we sell in the garden center, so seed starting tray, or into like a milk carton, which you cut the top off and put a couple of holes in the bottom. But you get that medium good and wet, and then you put the tray in a plastic bag, and then you don't have to water it until the seeds start. And then when they do start, you want to touch the soil, and if it feels moist, don't water it. If it feels dry, if it's dry, you want to water it heavy so that you completely saturate the soil, and then you let it dry out between watering. So you don't water on a daily basis or every other day or every third day. You feel the medium. If the medium feels moist, don't water. Because the main problem with starting seeds is that there are two fungi that damp seeds off. They're called Pythium and Rhizoctonia. And both of those, like the spores of those fungus like moist, warm conditions, just like seeds do. And that's why you use a peat-based mix, because with almost 100% of the soils that we have outside, there are spores for those particular funguses. So when you're putting soil into that mix, you're starting out with two strikes against you, because they're very, very active once they get warm and moist. And if you're not careful, they rot the plants off at the base, and the plants start to wilt, and you think, oh, I got to water again, and you water, and you're actually multiplying your sorrow. So you're better off with a little drier mix after they've germinated. So you germinate them in a very moist, warm condition. Once they start to, once you see the leaves, the seedling leaves start to push up above the surface of the mix, you take it out of the plastic bag and put it in a cool, sunny window, and let that medium dry out so that it isn't, you get rid of the conditions that will hasten the germinations of those spores. And then when they get 2 or 3 sets of true leaves, or when they get to be the size where you can handle them easily. You just carefully dig them out and put them into a soil mix. And the mix that we used to use in the greenhouse was a third sand, a third garden soil, and a third peat moss. But we're using a soilless mix all the way through now because it's much easier growing the plants in that mix. Doesn't mean that you're not going to get damping off with a peat-based soil. You can still get it by overwatering or by keeping those plants too wet. But once they are started and they are, the term for it is lignified. The cells have started to toughen up, so to speak. Then you can water a little bit more. But once you get them into that seed starting mix and get them in a plastic bag, you really don't have to worry about it because the moisture condenses on the plastic and drops back into the soil.
Do we need to add anything else to our soil mix when we're starting off, like bone or blood meal, anything like that?
If you're going to fertilize the seedlings, use about half-strength soluble plant food. We've got one of the fertilizers called Rooting and Blooming, and that's a very good fertilizer for seedlings. In a house situation where you haven't got optimum sunlight, you don't want to over-fertilize because that'll cause the plants to start stretching, and you'll have very spindly plants when you plant out. So not overstimulating them. Another product that we sell that works really well is a product called Osmocote, and it's a plastic encapsulated fertilizer. So a little bit of the fertilizer is leached out of that pellet every time you water. And all of our soils, if you dig through them, will have that Osmocote in it because that feeds the plant for 2 to 3 months.
So you mentioned a little bit about having the cover on our seed starting kits. I picked up a cover when I went to Jung's a couple weeks ago because besides for having wet soil conditions and having some of that darkness, we also need warmth and we need humidity.
Right. And those domes that you picked up are very good at that too. That takes the place of the plastic bag. I mean, you can, and then when seeds start to germinate, when you start to see the seeds germinating, you take the dome off because that reduces the humidity. Once the plants are started, they don't need that moist, warm condition. The roots will start taking up the moisture, and then you reduce or you kind of get the conditions that the damping off needs reduced. And you still can get it by overwatering, but if you water when it's dry and you let it dry out between waterings, you probably won't have that problem.
Well, we do have a call, so let's go to the phones and say, good morning, caller. What is your question for Dick Zondag, the garden doctor?
Yes, it's good to hear on the radio, Dick. I appreciate hearing all your information. You definitely have a lot up in your head about how to grow things, and definitely you're a professor of whatever. But question for you, everybody asks about when you can put fertilizer down and all that for your lawn. My lawn got dug up this year from Power and Light. They're redoing gas lines or whatever. When should I bought extra grass seed, and I want to thicken the lawn. When should I be putting this seed on?
What I would do is I would wait until the excess moisture has moved through the soil, so that the soil is open, and then put the seeds down and rake it in and work it in. If you put it on now and we get rains or we get something and it's sitting on the surface of the soil, it'll wash away. So when the soil is, when the excess moisture is moved through, the frost is out of the ground, especially in bare spots, you just sprinkle the lawn seed on top of it, and then you rake it so that you incorporate the seed, and then you somehow compact the soil. Some people have rollers that they use.
Yeah, I've got a roller, so actually roll right over the grass seed after you rake it in.
Right, and that brings the soil and the seed in good contact, and
so then the birdies probably can't get at it too then.
Right, and then you put some hay or straw over top of it, and that keeps the soil from drying out if we get the bright sunny days that are the temperatures get warm and it's windy. So
well, being a city city boy. Where the heck do I buy hay?
We have it at the
Oh, really?
garden center, and I think most.
Well, I'll come see you. I'd rather see all the plants and things. So I appreciate the information. You have a great day.
Thank you very much, and you too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Jung's Garden Center, while we're on the subject, where are your locations in the area, Dick?
Okay, well, we have 7 garden centers now. The one that I come from is Randolph. It's right on the south edge of Randolph, right on Highway 73. But we have the second one was Stevens Point on Highway 10, just east of 51. And then we got 3 in the Madison, well, actually 4 in the Madison area. One on, as you're coming into Sun Prairie on 51, there's one right on the, as you're coming into Sun Prairie. And then we have one on the north side of Madison on Northport Drive as you're going past Warner Park. We are just maybe a half a mile north of, or west of Warner Park. And then we have one on the south side of Madison, right off 151 on Highway PD. And then we just opened another one in Stoughton, right on Highway 151. I think 151. Anyway, it's right as you come into Stoughton. It used to be the Stoughton Garden Center, and they retired, and we moved in. So we've got our store set up and ready to go there. And then the last one we have is in Appleton. It's right off 41 on West Hill Boulevard. So if you get off on either on College Avenue or on Wisconsin Avenue, if you turn left off Wisconsin or right off College, you'll go right past the garden center there. So that one we opened last year, and so this is the second year that that one's been open. So 7 locations in central Wisconsin.
Well, let's see what question our next caller has for you on the phones. Good morning, caller. What's your question for the garden doctor?
Good morning. Sometime back, there was this scare about methane gas,
Okay?
and they couldn't find it. And then finally, the farmer told them that perhaps it was the radish nurse crop that was decaying and releasing this. Have we ever run into that in our gardens?
That's new to me. You know, methane gas is given off when vegetation and your garbage is decomposing. That's the methane gas is what comes out of garbage dumps and stuff like that.
Right.
Could be if you've got a lot of radishes there, but I don't know that radishes by themselves give off methane gas while they're growing. That's a new one. I mean, I'll have to do a little research, but boy, I've never, I mean,
Well, in connection with the caller's question, it was the smell of natural gas, and
Oh.
it was allegedly that it was a field of rotting radishes.
okay, well, radishes are now used by farmers quite a bit for green manure. For, you know, they plow it down and it provides more organic matter, and maybe the odor of the radishes, which does kind of, I mean, if you think about it, if you're eating a radish, that taste or that odor is kind of like natural gas, but no, I've never heard of them specifically giving off methane. I think if the field has a lot of radishes in it and they've just plowed the radishes under so that they're getting that organic matter in the soil, it might have given off that odor, but that's the first time I've heard of that.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Thank
Thanks
you so much for
calling.
the question. And green manure. So this is any time that farmers might be growing a cover crop, and the sole purpose is just to plow it back into the field, return
Right,
those nutrients.
right. We do that with some of our nursery ground because horticultural crops are very intense use of the soil. Every 4 or 5 years, we try to put the field into either a cover crop or, you know, we have used radishes and turnips and things like that. And, you know, they do produce a lot of organic matter, and when you plow it under, it brings back the organic matter in the soil, which means that the nutrients that you're putting in the ground will stay around longer. The soil will be much easier when it comes to digging the crops that we take out of the field. So, with gardens, composting and adding that compost to the gardens, there are a lot of videos on YouTube of people that are not tilling their gardens anymore, that they're just adding organic matter and using a pitchfork to loosen the ground before they do their planting. So there's a lot of interest in gardening. I mean, you just put gardening in the subject line of YouTube, and you're just off
Yeah.
to millions, I guess, of videos,
Something,
including me.
including yourself. Have you started working on those those raised bed videos yet?
Yes.
Those are
Yep,
up there.
yep. And we'll be doing a lot more planting of raised beds and of soil beds. I mean, I'm going to be doing some comparison of growing potatoes in a raised bed versus ground versus container growing of potatoes. And so there are a lot of them out there already, but I'm going to be doing them myself.
Looking forward to that. Let's go back to the phones and say good morning, caller. What is your question for Dick Zondag?
I have I have 3 amaryllis that have bloomed. So now I cut the stalks off. What do
Okay.
I do with them now?
Okay, the leaves should be coming up, right?
Well, they actually are up.
Okay, so you
They were
just,
up.
just keep
Yeah.
the plants watered, you know, very similar to what I was talking about before. You feel the soil, and when it's dry, you water heavy, and then you let it dry out between waterings. But after the danger of frost is, gone by, usually about mid-May, you take those bulbs out of the pots and plant them in the soil in a very sunny area, and you keep them watered through the summer, keep them growing, and then in the late part of July and August, fertilize them, because that's when the flowers for next year are being initiated in the bulb, so that they have the nutrients and stuff that they need. And then before you get a hard frost, dig the bulbs up and repot them. You can cut the leaves off, or you can leave the leaves on. It doesn't make any difference. And then put them in the basement, kind of rest them over the winter. You water them minimally. You don't want them to get bone dry, but you don't want to fertilize them and encourage them to grow. And then when that flower stalk starts coming up, you just bring it up into the sunlight, and you'll have blossoms next year.
Okay. Tell me again. Now you fertilize.
Yeah, you put them out in mid-May or
There
after
we
the
go.
danger of
Okay,
frost
in
is
May.
gone, in a sunny area.
Yeah.
You fertilize them in late July, August, maybe into September. And then it'll probably be in late October. Don't let them get a very hard frost on them, because that'll probably kill them.
Okay.
They really don't like cold weather.
Okay.
But then dig them up and repot them,
Okay.
and then put them in the basement. You can cut the leaves off, or you can leave them on. It doesn't make any difference.
Okay.
The reason that when you're buying bulbs, when you're buying amaryllis from us, they don't have any leaves on them, is that when you import the bulbs, and they come from, they come through Holland. They're sometimes grown in South Africa or places like that, but they come from Holland. They have to have all the soil removed from the roots, and the leaves have to be gone
Oh.
to
okay.
import them, and that's why there are no leaves on them.
Okay, I think I have it.
Okay?
All right. Thank you.
And thanks for calling.
Thank you so much for the question. And a reminder, you can always listen back to this on the audio page or wherever you listen to podcasts as well. We are speaking with Dick Zondag, the garden doctor from Jung's Garden Center, 7 different locations. And I want to go back to what you mentioned about the green manure and the cover crops.
Okay.
Let's say we have a plot of land that we've been using as a garden, and
Right.
it hasn't been working. The, the soil conditions, it's too clay. No matter what, adding sand, adding organic material doesn't seem to be enough. Should we be planting some cover crops then and just folding that back into soil and just giving it a year to maybe regenerate?
You don't have to let it rest for a year. I mean, if when you get done with your garden, that is a good thing to do, to put in a cover crop like buckwheat or even winter wheat or oats or something like that that will grow through the fall, and then next year you can either incorporate them or just mow them off and then plant, kind of work them up so that they're not a weed in the garden next year. But that will also add organic matter. But if it's not growing and you've been adding compost and sand and things like that, even to a clay soil, it's time for a soil test. You know, take a couple cores, you know, take a pipe. That's a very rudimentary soil tester, but drive it in the ground 6 to 8 inches in probably, depending on the size of your garden, of course, but maybe 3 or 4 or 5 cores of soil. And then you can take them to the county agent and they can send them into the soil testing lab in Madison, and they'll test your soil. You tell them what you're growing, and they'll run the pH, the nutrient levels, and they'll tell you exactly what you have to use to bring your soil up to the standards that it needs to grow crops. So, yeah, cover crops are excellent to bring up the organic matter in the soil. They also, the roots penetrating the soil will help encourage or bring up the better texture in your soil also.
So we could still plant maybe some flowers or something that might do a little well in the thicker soil, but then try to add more organic material in the latter half of the year.
Sure. If you're adding organic matter even to clay, it should. I mean, you know, once you get a good crop of stuff, adding organic matter just improves the soil. And so, you know, if it's not growing, get a soil test done. And then after that, it's just a matter of watching the color of the leaves. If the leaves are a nice dark green, the beans and, you know, the radishes and things that you're planting are a nice dark green, your soil is fine. If you get yellowing, especially during the growing season, now yellowing in the fall, that's natural, but yellowing when they should be growing, that's a sign that there's some nutrient that's missing. And so you either fertilize with a well-balanced fertilizer. You don't want to use too much nitrogen because nitrogen tends to make vegetables grow nuts, and you'll have beautiful carrot tops and nothing underneath. And tomatoes will grow 10 feet tall, but you'll never get fruit. You know, nitrogen tends to cause leaves to grow, and not and sometimes it even inhibits fruiting, and most of the things that you eat from a garden are the fruiting parts of the garden.
885-4446 if you have a question for the garden doctor. Let's go to the phone. Say, hello, caller. What is your question here?
Hello. I have a question about my tulips.
Okay.
When would be a good time to put some fertilizer on those? They're just starting to come through and I'm not sure when to do that.
Yeah, I think right now would be a good time to put the fertilizer on, and you want to use a bulb booster type fertilizer that has the phosphorus and potassium. A little bit of nitrogen isn't going to hurt, but you want mainly phosphorus and potassium because that encourages root growth and will encourage the plants to not only bloom well, but then it'll encourage the leaves that will put the carbohydrates back in the bulb that they are expending flowering, and you'll have a much better crop of flowers next spring. So
Okay.
right now is when you should be fertilizing, and then again in the fall when the plants are, when the bulbs are starting to initiate their flowers, and they're basically the same thing as tulips are the same as amaryllis. They form that flower primordia in the fall, and so you want to have an adequate amount of nutrients in the fall when they're doing that, so that they form the nice blooms for the following spring.
I was using bone meal. Would that work?
Bone meal is excellent. Yeah, bone meal is probably one of the better fertilizers for bulbs.
Okay,
Okay.
sounds great. Keep doing that. Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. And I think we have time for one more quick question. And before we wrap up the garden doctor, let's go back to the other line. Say good morning. What is your question?
Good morning. I have a bunch of grass and creeping Charlie and other weeds growing in my garden, and I usually work the garden up. And last fall I put about 6 inches of maple leaves in and see if I can get rid of some of the weeds. And I was planning on just making rows and planting stuff and leave the leaves on top just the way they are. Do you think that'll work?
It should work. There are, if you've got a garden that's completely covered with creeping Charlie and some of these other things, if you're not an organic gardener, if you if you believe in using herbicides, if you've got a lot of weeds in the garden, you can spray Roundup on them, and that will basically kill them. And then it takes about a week to 10 days for Roundup to do what it's going to do, and then you can work the garden up and plant your plants. Covering them with something, if you're not going to use that, leaving something on top of them, keeping the area between the rows of vegetables with a mulch of some sort or another will inhibit that also, because if you cover them up, they can't get any sunlight to make energy, and then remove as much of the vines as you can. I mean, with creeping Charlie, if you've got a lot of it, just rake it up, rake as much of the vines as you can, and just get rid of them, hide them in the garbage or something, But Roundup will take care of it, but it'll take care of everything. So you don't want to, if you've got it in your asparagus and the asparagus is coming up, it will take care of the asparagus too. So be sure that there's nothing there that you really want to save, and then it's like a house cleaning.
So if I put like 6 inches of leaves in the asparagus, would that hurt anything, or do you
No,
think
it
that'll
won't. In
take care of
fact,
some of the weeds too?
I covered my asparagus with about 6 inches of ground wood. I got some of the tree trimmings, some of the people that trim trees and grind it up. I've got several loads of that in my backyard, and I covered my asparagus with about 6 inches of that, and hopefully that'll keep the weeds going, because the asparagus will push up through it. I mean, the asparagus is going to come through it, and it will inhibit most of the weeds that come from seed. So that would work.
Well, thank you so much for that call as we wind it down. Dick, once again, the Bare Root Room, that is opening up next week?
Yep, it should be ready to go next week, and our store hours are 9 to 5 Monday through Saturday, not open on Sunday in Randolph. The other stores, it's 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, 9 to 4 on Saturday, and 10 to 3 on Sunday.
And online at Jung's Garden Center, also on YouTube as well.
Yes, we have, if you go to jungseed.com, there's a garden doctor field there that you can click on, which takes you to YouTube. And I've been doing a lot of videos on planting, on starting seeds, on starting strawberries. We've got one on asparagus. We've got several of them. I'm going to be doing one on dividing rhubarb. So we're going to try to build up a library of how-to videos.
Looking forward to that and to our next meeting on the Garden Doctor, brought to you by Jung's Garden Center. The following was a paid program. The views and opinions expressed are solely that of Jung's Garden Center, not WBEV, ESPN, nor Good Karma Brands.